Hi, this is Kugito, and I'm back with another Through the Ages video. This video is going to cover the final game I played in round 2 of the 2025 World Championships, a 2-player game between me and Vampire D. Now, as you can see, I did not need to win this game to finish first in my group, but there were still a few reasons for me to try hard at it. First, for most of the game, it wasn't certain that I would win the group. Second of all, there's the Glico reason. And third of all, as I said last time, because Bull 3, my major competition, timed out in one of our 4-player games, which I won, theoretically, it was possible that if Bull 3 hadn't timed out, they could have finished first and I could have finished last, meaning if I finish with 12 more points than Bull 3 does, that will essentially prove that Bull 3's timeout did not affect the outcome of the group. The game also mattered for Vampire D, even though Vampire D was certain to not be eliminated because they're finishing third. Finishing second or third does affect your seeding in the next round. So there's at least definitely something to play for Vampire D, and some non-tournament related reasons for me to care about the game too. So without further ado, let's take a look. So in this game I'm playing first. We can take a look at the leaders and wonders, especially in a 2-player game. You want to look at the cult leaders in Age 2, and we can see that the two big ones, Bach and Shakespeare, are both in the game. Meaning in this game it's definitely very important to take a printing press in Age 1 so that you can be prepared for either of the two major culture leaders that might come up in Age 2. I don't think any of the other leaders are even close to them in terms of being under consideration. In Age 3, there is no internet. There is Chaplin to continue with the theater theme, as well as Churchill, Gandhi, Mandela, who are more maybe all-purpose. Marie Curie and Sid Meier, perhaps for science, Sid Meier pairs were with internet, so might be worth consideration. But realistically, we'll want to keep one of these two Age 2 leaders until the end of Age 3 regardless. In Age 1, there are a number of good wonders, especially St. Peter's is great in the 2-player game. No military action leaders, notably. Saladin might be the best leader here, but there's some other good ones too. As for which card I wanted to take, so I could have maybe considered a yellow card, but I think it's best to take... I prefer to guarantee myself a leader this turn. Maybe Vampire D probably takes the pyramids, maybe the engineering genius, but almost certainly the pyramids. So Boudica probably would have been made available to me last turn, but taking a leader this turn also makes it easier for me to potentially take a wonder next turn, or just gives me a little more flexibility in that regard. And if I really want the rich land, I would probably be able to take this rich land. It also makes it easier for me to take the engineering genius if Vampire D takes the pyramids. So I think I definitely prefer taking a leader to one of these yellow cards. Sun Tzu, there is a Suez Canal in the game, but I think Boudica is overall a lot more consistent than Sun Tzu when I don't necessarily know. Especially in the previous game we covered, I got a strong Suez Canal, but that was partly because there wasn't Bach or Shakespeare in the game. In this game, I definitely want to focus on getting a good Bach or Shakespeare going instead of maybe messing around with the Suez Canal. Can still be good, but it's not necessarily something I want to hyper-focus on, and I think Boudica is just stronger in general, all-purpose, when it doesn't seem... I don't think there's a... Yeah, there's no Colossus in the game either. Maybe Colosseum, but it might not come out of the deck, so... Yeah, I think this is... Boudica's probably... I mean, if someone wants... if someone has, like, a military-focused style, I could definitely see Sun Tzu, but I don't really, so that's why I took Boudica. And Vampire D does take the pyramids. I think while that does give me the engineering genius, I think that's still probably better than letting me have pyramids, especially when we don't know what Age A leader. That's another reason to take Boudica over Sun Tzu, is since Vampire D will probably take pyramids, I don't know if I'll be able to get a good Age A leader, so Boudica's science might be helpful for me in getting ways to avoid corruption without a wonder. Age 1 begins. So, in my turn, I think there's a pretty clear right answer here. I can elect Boudica, take Engineering Genius, build a mine, and increase my population. Engineering Genius is a good card to take for one civil action, so because I'm getting the Engineering Genius, I don't regret taking an AJ yellow card. I think nothing else is really worth consideration. Roman roads I'll get next turn if I want it, which I probably will. Vampire D takes the Code of Laws for 3 civil actions. High price, but Code of Laws is definitely a strong technology in a 2-player game, so I think it is justifiable. As a result, though, Vampire D may have to skip a leader. I guess Vampire D doesn't have to skip a leader. Vampire D will be able to get Hammurabi on their next turn. Now, this does, however, mean that Vampire D will miss out on one civil action from Hammurabi, because instead of electing Hammurabi this turn, they'll have to elect Hammurabi the next turn. So as well as spending 3 civil actions for the Code of Laws, they're also missing out on electing a leader turn 2. That's an extremely heavy price for the Code of Laws. That price is heavy enough that I think it might actually be worth letting me have the Code of Laws, especially since Vampire D has their 5th civil action anyway. So this is a situation where maybe the price of taking the early Code of Laws is too steep. But I do understand this play. Oh yeah, I drew, that was a territory on my turn. Since I'm Boudica, and since it looks like Vampire D is going to get Hammurabi, I figure that I do want to get the event deck moving. I will very likely, you know, have the advantage over Vampire D in terms of strength, because Vampire D has Hammurabi, so. I reveal Development of Science. So this turn, is there... I guess the alternative to taking the Roman roads would be to take... Well, I do want to build my lab. With the Engineering Genius, I will be able to finish Roman roads. Yeah, so if I didn't take Roman roads, I might do something like build a lab, take the alchemy, and with my last civil action, not much, increase my population to go into consumption. I think the Roman roads just is a very... Especially because I have the Engineering Genius, even with building a lab this turn, I will be guaranteed to have enough resources to finish the Roman roads next turn. So especially with Engineering Genius, I think Roman roads is a very strong wonder to have. And also just in general is good to have. And if I didn't take it, there's not really much else to spend that extra civil action on. So I think this turn is pretty straightforward. As for my remaining 2 civil actions, after building the lab and taking the Roman roads, to take the alchemy again, not really. Culture Heritage, definitely not for 2 civil actions. I could consider, again, skipping the Roman roads for one of these cards, but none of them. I mean, Engineering Genius is nice, but I don't think, not for 3 civil actions, I don't think. So overall, I think this is a very straightforward turn. Guess instead of taking the alchemy, I could have potentially built the first stage of the Roman roads, perhaps, and increased my population. But again, that would have put me in consumption early. I don't really want either of these yellow cards, especially... Well, Urban Growth, maybe not terrible if I'm aiming for alchemy, but also, if I don't take the alchemy here, Vampire D could take the alchemy, and then I wouldn't... You know, I probably have something else in the row I could take after finishing the Roman roads, so it's definitely not a necessity to take this alchemy. And I could also consider building one stage. But the thing is, building one stage of the Roman road this turn, so next turn I could finish it for 3 civil actions, but then what would I do with my last civil action anyway? Probably take one of these cards. I mean, if the Engineering Genius is available, then I would definitely regret not building one stage of the Roman roads. But I think especially, well, Vampire D is going to take Hammurabi, elect Hammurabi, there are 3 more civil actions left. I guess they'll probably want to spend 2 increasing the population and building the lab. I think it's actually pretty likely that the Engineering Genius will be available for me on 1 civil action next turn. So that's a reason to build one stage of the Roman roads with the Engineering Genius this turn. Give up on the alchemy, maybe increase my population, going into consumption. With Boudica, I could take food from Boudica maybe instead of science to make up for going into consumption early. And then aim on taking the Engineering Genius next turn while finishing Roman roads. There are definitely good H1 wonders in the deck. And with Machu Picchu, that makes alchemy a little less appealing. In general, alchemy is the least appealing H1 economic building in a 2-player game because there's 2 copies of Scientific Method, only 1 copy of Colon Selective Breeding. And especially with Machu Picchu, I might prefer getting iron and irrigation and skipping alchemy. So I think in retrospect, I should have at least more heavily considered a play where instead of taking this alchemy, I build one stage and maybe take the urban growth or frugality, maybe just pop, probably just pop. With Roman roads, I also am a little more stressed on my civil actions, which is another reason not to take a card for 2 civil actions, even a good card like alchemy. So yeah, actually in retrospect, maybe it would have been better not to take this alchemy. Anyway, I draw Pestilence and a bonus card. Vampire D does indeed take Hammurabi, elects him, pops ones, and takes cultural heritage and urban growth instead of building the lab. I guess the plan is to use the urban growth on the lab. So, in effect, that's spending 1 civil action for 2 resources, but also -1 science by not building the lab this turn. On the other hand, this does let Vampire D finish the pyramids this turn. On the other hand, Vampire D could have, instead of taking these cards, could have built the lab and taken the engineering genius. Wait. Yeah, okay. Play, elect. Yeah, so they couldn't have taken the engineering genius this turn while building the lab. That's true. So maybe their plan is, well, I prioritize the pyramids over the lab, so next turn I'll save up my resources to finish the pyramids, and then the turn after that I'll build the lab with the urban growth. That's defensible. And then they ended with Code of Laws. Maybe if Vampire D built the lab, they could play Code of Laws next turn, which would give them the extra civil action anyway. Whereas here, well, the Culture Heritage does let them build the Code of Laws, but this is spending 2 civil actions to get Code of Laws a turn earlier. I understand the play, but it is very civil action heavy. Now with Hammurabi and Pyramids and Code of Laws being civil action heavy is less important. So I guess there maybe wasn't a great alternative. If it were me, I probably would have built the lab and just taken the Culture Heritage maybe and skipped the urban growth. But if Vampire D values finishing the pyramids earlier over getting the second lab, maybe there's a possibility that Vampire D could build an alchemy directly at some point. So there's logic to this play. I see that I really need to remember the cards in my hand. Anyway, I revealed development of planning, so the options for this were, looks like I took development of civil life. Warfare, civil life, and trade routes. I couldn't take warfare, and between trade routes and civil life, I do think civil life is more powerful in general. 2 less resources, but it saves you a civil action. I think that's probably worth it. I might have not been able to easily get out of corruption if I had taken the trade routes, but I think it's mostly valued saving up the civil action. Now, we can see here another reason, a sort of punishment. Well, being able to develop the alchemy with the civil life was an advantage of taking the alchemy, but as a punishment of taking the alchemy, it means that without building 1 stage of my Roman roads, I would have had to skip this iron if I wanted to finish Roman roads this turn, and I wasn't willing to skip the iron for that, especially since it's available for 1 civil action for me here. So, yeah, that, in retrospect, taking the alchemy was partly wrong. Anyway, though, like I said, even though this forces me not to finish the Roman roads this turn, I think it's important to take the iron when it shows up in a 2-player game, so especially for 1 civil action. So I did want it. I am at least able to do something with my turn, upgrading the lab, so this is kind of comparable to finishing Roman roads. I mean, it still would be better to finish Roman roads, but this is at least still upgrading my economy instead of just doing nothing, so... I also increase my population. I do build that first step this turn. Now, there were a few alternatives to popping here, especially maybe taking the engineering genius. Well, okay, actually there wasn't. I needed to pop to get out of corruption, yeah. So we can see here that I couldn't have done this turn. I definitely couldn't have done the turn if I had taken trade routes, because it would have cost me more civil actions to play an upgrade alchemy. So I do think taking civil life was right here, and I couldn't take the engineering genius while doing these other things because I needed to pop to get out of corruption. When I finish Roman roads, my yellow bank will be back here and I'll be out of consumption again at least. So I think it's not a big deal from a consumption point of view to pop here. It's late enough anyway. So this turn, I am skipping some notable cards. Nostradamus could be a good leader, but there's Saladin on the row anyway. There's also other potential good leaders that could come out of the deck for me. So Barbarossa, I think I haven't built any military yet, so Barbarossa would also be good for me. Isabella is always a fine leader. Gutenberg probably not, since I already have alchemies. But I think for 2 civil actions, considering all the other important things I have to do this turn, Nostradamus isn't worth it. Monarchy could also be a card I could consider, but I've got the iron. even with alchemies, my science might be a little under strain. I'll need a military card soon, so yeah, this turn looks good to me. I draw a rebellion and a medieval army. Vampire D does indeed finish the pyramids and take Saladin, so Vampire D is about to have... Oh, Vampire D also plays the Code of Laws with the development of civil life, so, and takes the monarchy. So Vampire D is setting up to have a huge boatload of civil actions. You know, this might be reaching the point where Vampire D is on a little civil action overkill, perhaps. Vampire D also doesn't elect Saladin this turn, for which I don't really see... I guess Vampire D is probably planning on maybe doing a monarchy revolution next turn, which is the only reason why they wouldn't just play Saladin this turn, because absent revolution, Saladin is strictly better than Hammurabi. On the other hand, Vampire D is only going to have one science next turn, so if the plan was to do a revolution, Vampire D probably should have played the cultural heritage this turn. I guess Vampire D can play the cultural heritage and do the revolution next turn, though. As long as that doesn't put Vampire D in corruption, which they will be in corruption. Well, they can build a warrior. So, okay, I guess if the plan is to next turn play cultural heritage, revolution, build a warrior to get out of corruption, that makes sense. I do see that rebellion. Again, I want to get the event deck moving forward. I expect to be stronger than Vampire D. Vampire D is spending their resources on civil actions instead of stuff that could help them with military. Now, the rebellion, I don't have a happy face solution yet, but I also figured with the Roman roads, I will, you know, my yellow bank will be better than Vampire D's, so I should be in more of a position to not have any unhappy workers. I do finally finish the Roman roads this turn as well, so I think that, again, there's not that many cards in the row that would be better for me than finishing the Roman roads with these 3 civil actions. And I also have enough resources, thanks to the development of markets, to finish upgrading my alchemy. So this is a very strong economic turn for me, really getting my economy going. The biggest weakness of this turn is it gives up some cards in the row, in particular the Swordsman. Now I have the Medieval Army tactic in my hand. There's still both Knights in the deck, so I think giving up Swordsman is fine. Giving up Irrigation, a little more questionable, an important card in a 2-player game. That being said, that is the first copy of Irrigation, so I think Vampire D has a good chance of taking it themselves, just leaving the second one to me. On the other hand, since Vampire D has so many civil actions, they might risk not taking this Irrigation, especially if they're doing the Revolution play, which they set up for last turn. Then Vampire D might also skip this Irrigation, in which case they would have a good chance of denying the second copy to me because of all their civil actions. With that in mind, maybe I should have taken the Irrigation. Now, it looks like I did need to upgrade this alchemy to get out of corruption. I could have built a warrior to get out of corruption, but I have the medieval army tactics in my hand. Now, I have the population for the knights anyway, but another reason not to want to build the warrior this turn is I'm going to want to get an Age 1 leader at some point, and at this point I was definitely eyeing Barbarossa. Even though I don't have irrigations going, I think Barbarossa is always a good leader. If you're in a position like this, we can elect him towards the end of Age 1, when you haven't built any military yet. Just build all your military with Barbarossa. He gives you a ton of value when you do that. So I was definitely eyeing Barbarossa, which meant I didn't want to build any military until I elect Barbarossa. Also, with the Roman roads, gives Barbarossa a little bit more of a yellow bank to play with. So that's one reason to get out of corruption by upgrading my lab instead of being a warrior. Also, obviously, like I said, giving me an extra science. Skipping irrigation, especially if I'm eyeing Barbarossa, is a little bit more questionable. So I think instead of upgrading this lab, taking the irrigation definitely would be highly defensible. Maybe alternately upgrading the lab and popping or something, although don't want to pop too much when you're aiming for Barbarossa either. So I think there's a little bit of a tricky turn where I really would have liked... although, actually, if I'm aiming for Barbarossa, I can't take the irrigation, because if I take the irrigation, Barbarossa will be discarded in Vampire D's turn. Now, I could maybe hope for Isabella, but I don't know when Isabella will be revealed. The age might end before I get a chance to take her. So, given that Barbarossa is a leader that I think I'm well set up for, and that I know will be available before the age ends, I definitely want to get him. And since Vampire D already took Saladin, as long as I don't take any of these cards, I am guaranteed to get Barbarossa next turn. So that tipped maybe my decision in not taking this irrigation and doing these other things instead. Discard the aggression and draw our raiders into historic territory. Vampire D seeds, flipping the event deck. Vampire D finally busts the second lab with the urban growth. Takes an alchemy. Maybe Vampire D could have considered not building the lab quite yet so that they could build it directly with the alchemy next turn, but Vampire D has so many civil actions, probably the extra science is worth the extra civil action, the civil action they would have saved by building the alchemy directly at this point. Increases the population, takes irrigation and reserves, and builds a warrior to get out of corruption. As we can see, Vampire D does take this irrigation. I think they definitely should have highly considered not taking it, so they would have the opportunity to deny me the second copy, though. I seed, even though I'm weakest, I think I actually did not seed any strength events. So, yeah. I reveal an inhabited territory. I am able to win it, only for 2, which is definitely fortunate for me. Although, Vampire D had Hammurabi for most of Age 1, so they didn't have many chances to draw bonus cards. This turn, I had no reason not to develop the iron. I will want knights soon, but I don't need them immediately. They should be available for 1 civil action on my next turn. None of the other cards in the row, I think, are worth passing up, being able to upgrade this iron. As I said, I wanted Barbarossa too. So by using Barbarossa, I can use Barbarossa's ability once, as well as upgrading my second iron mine to get out of corruption. Skipping these cards. These cards might be nice to have, though I am also gonna need an H2 government form, so I need to save up my science for that. Breakthrough for 2 civil actions. I think I can't really afford to take that because I was pretty severely... I need to spend a lot of blue cubes to get out of corruption. And I also use Barbarossa's ability a second time. I will have more than enough food to get a knights with Barbarossa's abilities, so 2 knights, so I wasn't worried about building 2 warriors. Yeah, I think this turn, not much else to say about this turn. I think, like I said, this turn seems pretty straightforward to me. Breakthrough maybe major card missing out on, but for 2 civil actions, it's kind of it's good, but it's not fantastic. I also have alchemies going anyway. It will be a good card for Vampire D, though, for sure. Vampire D takes the Himeji Castle. It's definitely, you know, good to have when I have Barbarossa. Will help them protect themselves. Plays the reserves, which lets them complete Himeji Castle immediately. Takes the iron, as well as that breakthrough. Skipping the knights. Maybe that means Vampire D has an infantry tactic. Although, they're also giving me the chance to deny swordsman from them. I want to seed, so... Right, there was a Pestilence I seeded. So we know the 2 other cards I seeded in the deck are this Pestilence and the Rebellion. So even though Vampire D took Strength, that may be an indication that Vampire D, the event Vampire D seeded... Actually, I think that Inhabited Territory was the event Vampire D seeded. So I think I actually knew that there wasn't a Strength event. But another reason that I wanted to seed is because 2 of the events I had seeded, that Pestilence, which I had seeded, and the Rebellion, well, the Rebellion wouldn't have hurt, I mean, it would have hurt Vampire D, maybe not by that much, but as we can see, what I really wanted to get out was that Pestilence, because when Vampire D loses this population, it will actually be impossible for them to avoid Rebellion easily, because they don't have enough food to pop, or to get any more happy faces. So Vampire D will be forced to destroy something to get out of Rebellion. So that's the major reason why I wanted to seed that colony, because I was really hoping to get out Pestilence. So definitely fortunate for me that that Pestilence came out. I do want this Knights. I took this copy instead of this copy because well, we can see what the rest of my turn is. I do obviously want to play it, and I think to get out of corruption, well, building a second Knights and playing the medieval army tactic is basically equivalent, and so I built the second copy of Knights just to help me get out of corruption easier. Like I said, it's essentially equivalent if I'm not using those resources for anything else, which I'm not because I still have enough to finish upgrading my irons. And take the irrigation, which I definitely wanted, especially with Barbarossa, make sure I have it. Now, the reason I took that copy of Knights is because of the printing press. So, taking this copy would have denied Vampire D the Knights, which definitely would have been good for me. Now, you know, the age is going to end, meaning if Vampire D wants that medieval army tactic I played, they will have to spend 2 military actions to copy it, so it'll be kind of hard. Definitely possible, though. So, all else being equal, I would have taken this copy of Knights to deny Knights to Vampire D, but all else isn't equal. Because if I had taken this copy of Knights, then the printing press would have been on 1 civil action for them next turn. And as we saw, with Shakespeare in the game, printing press is a very important card. So I wanted to leave printing press on 2 civil actions for Vampire D, just to make it a little bit harder for them to take the printing press. The first copy of printing press was discarded. I guess I had other things to do. I should have mentioned that when it was on the road, though I kind of forgot. But this is the second copy of printing press, so I wanted to make it as likely as possible that I might get it, which is why I wanted to have it be in this slot for Vampire D instead of that one. Come on. Sorry for the lag. H2 begins. Vampire D seeds, reveals the rebellion. Unfortunately, because the rebellion happened after the age was over, I had no good way to get the happy faces. Means that I will be hit by the rebellion. It's going to be a pretty bad rebellion for me too, so this card ended up not being good for me. With Vampire D civil actions, it's much less bad for them. On the other hand, seeding it meant that I was able to get out that Pestilence this turn, which, as we saw, well, Vampire D, if I hadn't seeded and Vampire D seeded, then it would have been hit them anyway, so seeding ended up not working out for me, but that's how the game goes sometimes. Vampire D is forced to destroy their farm to get out of rebellion. Valued this warrior more. Takes swordsman, so it looks like they do indeed have an infantry tactic in their hand. Also takes the knights, maybe they just want to upgrade both units. Maybe they're a little afraid of me with Barbarossa and all the military. Definitely be pretty strong soon with the medieval army. Now it's my turn. I can't seed. Thankfully, Vampire D didn't take the printing press. I definitely wanted it. Now, this is a very heavy cost for me, considering I only have 2 civil actions to work with this turn. At least with Barbarossa, I will be able to stay out of corruption pretty easily. Now, I guess there's not... The major... Yeah, so... The major choice for me this turn was between printing press and St. Peter's Basilica. St. Peter's Basilica definitely would have been extremely nice for me to have. It's always good in a 2-player game because it lets you just exist off of theaters. And it also would just provide a way for me to spend my resources, which with my irons upgraded, it might be a little difficult for me to spend my resources over the next few turns. So it's both a good one in itself and also gives me a resource sink, which I need this turn. However, if I took the St. Peter's Basilica, I would not be able to take this printing press. And I just thought that it was too important for me to set myself up for a Shakespeare, especially with Vampire D having so many civil actions. If Bach shows up on their turn, they'll very easily be able to take Bach. And if Vampire D takes Bach, and I have Shakespeare, but I don't have printing press, then Vampire D could also take the journalism, because there's only 1 copy of journalism in a 2-player game. And if Vampire D takes Bach and journalism, and I don't have printing press, then that's a situation where I can lose this game. I forgot to show our relative positions after age 1, but we can see that the major difference between us is Vampire D has a lot more civil actions than I do, but I have a much stronger economy, a much stronger resource and science production than Vampire D does. My strength is also better. So I was pretty happy with my position, especially since Vampire D had to destroy their farm to get out of rebellion. But I thought, again, if Vampire D got Bach and journalism, and I was stuck with a Shakespeare with no libraries, Vampire D could turn things around quite quick. So to avoid that scenario, I thought that the printing press was a more necessary card, whereas the St. Peter's Basilica, while very good, was more of a luxury. With, I also used Barbarossa's ability. Now, I built a warrior instead of a knight, mainly because I am, I think, out of free population, so, I was thinking there was a possibility I might end up destroying this warrior, destroying whatever military unit I built with Barbarossa, so that I could put it into something else. This is going to have to go into a happy face solution pretty soon. Hopefully, Vampire D won't take both Theology and the Bread and Circuses. I didn't think they would. So that was the reason I built the warrior instead of the knights, even though the knights would give me 1 more strength. I think it probably doesn't matter too much. With my last level action, I take the warfare, especially with Barbarossa, and with, you know, I don't... there are 2 reasons to take the warfare, I think. First of all, obviously good with Barbarossa. I'm gonna want to use Barbarossa's ability a lot. This will give me an H2. This will give me more H2 draws to work with. Another important reason to take warfare, though, is because with all of Vampire D's civil actions, there's a good chance they'll be able to deny me the Kanmon. And if Vampire D denies me the Kanmon, I will want to set myself up for a Republic, because I didn't take the Monarchy either, and the warfare makes the Republic significantly better. So another advantage of taking Printing Press over St. Peter's Basilica is it lets me take the warfare with it, which, as covered, I think is also a pretty important card. Not as important as Printing Press or maybe St. Peter's, but still good, and these together I do think are better to have in hand than St. Peter's. I don't play the tactic, though, because I really wanted to be able to seed next turn. Vampire D, I thought, was probably almost certainly not going to get stronger than me anyway, so I didn't see the need to play the tactic now. I was hoping to draw a card I could seed to get the event deck moving again. And I did. Vampire D increases the population, rebuilds the irrigation directly, takes the Bread and Circuses, and the Patriotism, and develops the Swordsman and takes the urban growth. They don't upgrade any Swordsmen. It wouldn't really have made a difference for them in terms of who's strongest anyway. They thankfully leave me the Theology. They probably should have considered denying me the Theology, because I so desperately needed a happy face solution, but it would have been somewhat of an expensive denial for them. They would have had to skip this card and something else, developing the Swordsman. I do want to see that I'm strongest. I think I forget if I seeded this card or not, so, but like I said, I wanted to get the event deck moving again while I'm strongest, and with Barbarossa, I expect it to be stronger for the foreseeable future. Probably Vampire D seeded this, because they took irrigation, maybe not, though. Anyway, the extra food, I think maybe I seeded it, and that was another reason I wanted Barbarossa, because that gives me more Barbarossa activations, which, well, first of all, I definitely wanted to finally get my happy face situation fixed, especially since if I use Barbarossa's ability again, I will need this happy face. So I definitely felt that these 3 civil actions of constructing the Theology was necessary. For my last civil action, well, I used Barbarossa's ability, but my last civil action is to develop the Warfare. This will let me use Barbarossa's ability and play the Medieval Army, thus putting a ton of pressure on Vampire D, while also giving me 1 card draw for something I could potentially seed. Now, doing it this way does mean I have to skip both the Breakthrough and the Revolutionary Idea. These are both obviously good cards to have, especially for 1 civil action. That being said, my science situation is looking good. I'll have enough science to play Kanmon next turn, for example. I also, at this point, don't have that many Age 2 techs I want to play necessarily. I mean, I'll want to play Selective Breeding. Well, maybe not, because I have the irrigations. So I don't even necessarily need Selective Breeding. It's really only the Government form and the Opera that I'll probably really want to play in terms of H2 techs. So with me being on Alchemies and even 5 Science Production with the Roman Roads, as well as after the H2 Government form, not really needing that many H2 techs in particular, I figured I'd probably, you know, Rifleman, cannons, nice to have, but my strength is looking good for the foreseeable future. So I figured that my science situation was looking pretty good already, and I didn't really need to spend a civil action on the Breakthrough or 2 civil actions on taking and playing the Revolutionary Idea. Since I'm only on 4 civil actions, I also need to be very mindful of what I spend the civil actions on. Every yellow card is a pretty high cost for me right now. playing tactics. This put me at 16 strength, so Vampire D definitely has to respond in some measure. Vampire D plays the patriotism and responds by building 1 knight, taking the revolutionary idea and the efficient upgrade, upgrading 2 units to warriors, and playing a temple to, well, I'm not so sure about this temple because the rebellion's out already, so having unhappy workers lying around is actually totally fine for Vampire D at this point. And they have a bread and circuses in their hand anyway, so, but I guess it's giving them 1 culture production. This is a questionable play for me, though, for sure. As for my turn, Vampire D takes strength with Saladin. Now, I could definitely try and infiltrate against them. Taking the strength of Saladin is a little interesting. Oh, right. So Vampire D has Himeji Castle. So by using these upgrades, unfortunately Vampire D doesn't have a tactic. But with the 10 strength from Saladin and the Himeji Castle will put them up to 15 strength if they sacrifice a swordsman or a knight, which will mean they will definitely be able to defend against my aggression. Now, I could still consider playing my aggression against them to kind of force them to sacrifice a unit, but I sort of valued, you know, I want to draw cards to seed an H2 tactic, stuff like that. So I valued the 2 card draws over forcing Vampire D to sacrifice a unit. On the other hand, Vampire D is still only on bronze mines, so having to rebuild this unit would be a pretty significant cost. They also don't really have the free population to do it. So looking at it again, maybe playing the aggression against Vampire D and forcing them to sack that unit would have been a good idea, because they're not really able to replace that unit anytime soon. Even the following turn when they can pop again, that will be unhappy. So, I mean, they could play about 6s, but again, they're only on iron mines, so yeah, I think maybe I should have played that aggression after all. I don't, though. I do take the Republic. Now, I could potentially wait for the Kanmon, but again, Vampire D might take the Kanmon anyway. And also, the Republic is available right now. I can play it right now to finally fix my civil action situation. With the Warfare, the Republic is fine to have. I forgot to mention I also use Barbarossa's ability, I think mainly to get out of corruption. So, I figure the Republic is probably only a bit worse, maybe even just as good as the Kanmon when you have Warfare, and it's available right now, so I did want to take it, finally get the civil actions again. The real question I thought was with remaining 3 civil actions, that cost me all my science, so I can't upgrade my irrigations, for example. So I can really only take cards at this point. Right, I had to use Barbarossa's ability to get out of corruption. As for which cards to take, there are definitely some good options. I could consider one of these wonders, perhaps, but I think maybe not so much. Kremlin, I think I can't really afford. I don't have the happy faces for it. I have a lot of civil actions anyway. Railroad, worth considering. The strength boost would be nice, but I am only on iron mines, so it's a little... I could finish it next turn. It would still be fine, but not the most exciting wonder. Also, taking the Transcontinental Railroad would mean that I couldn't aim for the Harvard College, which I think would be a better wonder for me. Suez Canal, I can't really afford without knowing that I'll have a colony in my hand for it. So what I end up taking is the Frugality and the Richland. I will obviously be upgrading my farms, probably to Selective Breeding at this point because it's so deep into Age 2. Upgrading irrigations at this point probably wouldn't give me enough population. So the Richland will be useful for those Selective Breeding upgrades, and the Frugality will be good once I have that Selective Breeding going. I figured I didn't really need the Cavalryman. I mean, they might be nice for an Age 3 military tech, but I thought that I wasn't too worried about Vampire D maybe warring me in Age 3, and I felt that I was in a good position now with my, at this point, huge economic advantage over Vampire D, that I was in a much better position to just win peacefully and not worry about the military. So for that reason, I felt the Cavalryman wasn't that important a card for me to take. Engineering Genius definitely would also be nice. I think that maybe instead of this Richland, I could have considered taking Engineering Genius plus Cavalryman. I think the reason I didn't take it was because I wasn't sure if I would get the Harvard College, because Vampire D might take the Harvard College, and so if I didn't get the Harvard College, the Engineering Genius would kind of do nothing for me. Another play I could have considered would be taking Engineering Genius and Railroad. I do have enough resources to finish Railroad next turn, so even though I'm only on Iron Mines, it's still it would still be a pretty good wonder, and maybe I could get an early oil or something. Yeah, this play was a little questionable for me. I think that probably not important to take the cannon. It's only the first copy. None of these other cards are too important for me, but I think maybe Engineering Genius plus Railroad, or maybe Frugality plus Railroad. I don't need the Engineering Genius for the Railroad. Maybe the food's more important for me than the resources, especially with Railroad. I mean, I have more than enough resources. Is the rich land for 2 civil actions really doing that much for me? Maybe not. So, yeah, in retrospect, I should have at least considered the railroad. I think I didn't really think about it too much. I think I sort of dismissed the railroad because I'm only on Iron Mines. But even when you're on Iron Mines, the railroad could definitely be good. It would also help me militarily pressure Vampire D even more. Anyway, I draw a bonus card and another aggression. Vampire D plays a revolutionary idea so they can finally get some Iron Mines and takes an urban growth. So Vampire D also passes up on these. I mean, Vampire D doesn't have the resources for a wonder probably, so it makes sense for Vampire D to pass those up. Also passes up the scientific method, but Vampire D has the alchemy. They can't play the scientific method next turn. They might not want to. I think maybe scientific method instead of urban growth and Cavalryman or the Engineering Genius or something could have been considered. I do decide to upgrade my farms to irrigations. I think that it was mainly because I felt like I didn't really have much better to do. And the selective breeding still isn't out, so there's still, I mean, Vampire D could still definitely deny me the selective breeding even though they've upgraded the irrigations. But I think it was mainly because, you know, I didn't want to take these leaders. I was still waiting for Bach or Shakespeare. I don't need to take the opera yet. It'll be available for 1 civil action next turn. So I probably just will end up seeing what else I do with my civil actions. Oh, right. So I decide that I'll also just build a 3rd farm. I think the major reason I decided to do that is because if you think about what I'll be doing next turns, right? Really soon, I'm going to want to start building operas and or printing presses with one of the culture leaders. So so ideally I'll start doing that next turn, if not the following turn, which means that even if I end up getting the selective breeding, I might not actually be able to get selective breeding upgrades going until maybe into age 3, and that's especially a problem because if I get Bach, whether I get Bach or Shakespeare, I'll need population to put into those urban buildings, and if I didn't do this, I would not be able to pop next turn, so it would be kind of hard. I mean, I could disband a warrior to put into that urban building, but then what would I do for the second urban building? It's not clear. And so, even though, you know, getting 3 farms, not the best, I thought that if I didn't do this turn, then I wasn't sure when I would ever get my farm upgrades going. Because, especially since, like I said, ideally I'm going to be spending the next 2 or 3 turns building urban buildings with my resources. So, with that consideration, I think this play does make sense. With my remaining civil actions, I did want the riflemen. I mean, they're available for me for 1, and definitely could be useful for me to just protect myself, or either military pressure Vampire D or protect myself. Obviously, if I draw any H2 tactics that require infantry, this rifleman would be a necessity. So I think it's definitely viable for 1 civil action. Cannons, similar reasoning. And I decided to take the cavalryman. I mean, I don't need any of these other cards. This opera will still not be discarded after Vampire D's turn, so I'm still guaranteeing myself getting an opera next turn. And with that in mind, I don't think any of these other cards were super vital. Maybe the Harvard College, but if I took the Harvard College, I wouldn't be able to make my farm play. So, This at least means that I'm ready for any H2 or H3 tactic. And I do draw 2 H2 tactics. Vampire D does take the Harvard College. On the other hand, that Engineering Genius earlier would have been useful for them. But instead they take reserves, finally finish upgrading their mines. They're still taking strength with Saladin. And I haven't really discussed it, but I mean I could maybe consider aggressing Vampire D to force them to sacrifice a unit, but I didn't. I probably, especially after trying these tactics, maybe I should have. Although at this point Vampire D has the food that they and the resource income that they can rebuild their army easier. Anyway, I increase my population. We can see that the selective breeding was unfortunately available for me next turn, so that makes my farm play from last turn definitely less good, but it's how the cookie crumbles. Unfortunately, there's still neither Bach or Shakespeare on the row either. They're both in the last 10 cards of the deck. So instead I have to spend this turn doing other things. And I decide, well, since I'm still have Barbarossa, I might as well use them again to get some cannons for these H2 tactics that I just drew. I can only use Barbarossa once after increasing my population with the Frugality. The Frugality gives me just enough food to use Barbarossa's ability, and I wanted this free pop for urban buildings instead of putting them into this army. Now I can't use Frugality with Barbarossa's ability anyway, so I would have only been able to use Barbarossa's ability once this turn regardless. And so that means that in order to get a second cannon going, I have to disband the warriors. Not ideal, but since I built this warrior with Barbarossa, it only really cost me 1 rock to do this. I have a lot of rocks anyway, not the end of the world. And by building two cannons, next turn I'll be able to change to this tactic and give my strength a big boost. I do have to take an opera this turn. This turn I had no reason not to deny Vampire D the opera. This is a weakness of Vampire D playing their turn the way they did. They won't be able to get an opera. So I definitely wanted to deny that to them. As I decided to take this breakthrough, similar logic, even though it costs 1 civil action more than this breakthrough, as we'll see, I'll end up not really wanting that civil action for anything else regardless. I don't really want the navigation. I don't know if there's any colonies in the deck, I think, and I probably won't have the science for it regardless. The science is going into operas and another card that I'm about to take. So the civil action I would take from taking this breakthrough, I wouldn't really want to use anyway, but taking this breakthrough, I deny it to Vampire D. Vampire D is also having serious science issues even after the Harvard College is complete. And I also take the architecture, since I'm planning on going hard into operas and possibly printing presses if I don't get Bach, although Vampire D taking Bach would be pretty speculative. I mean, they could take Bach aiming to get movies, but I figured there's a good chance I would get Bach, and then this architecture would let me get movies much easier. I just got the aggressions. I kept this tactic, the Napoleonic army. I figured there was a fair chance. I mean, I'm definitely still lined up for it, so if I don't find a better way to get rid of these warriors, I might just end up upgrading them to riflemen for the Napoleonic army tactic anyway, so I wanted to keep that for that possibility, and at this point I kind of given up on being able to aggress against Vampire D with the Himeji Castle, so... And we can see Vampire D, even though Shakespeare and Bach are both on the row, I mean, they can't really get either of them because Vampire D isn't getting the operas. They could, as I said earlier, take Bach and hope for movies, but that would be risky, so Gaudi does make sense. They also could definitely use Gaudi maybe on the scientific method or the alchemy to get some more science going. They have to elect Gaudi this turn. Uses him immediately for bread and circuses. Pops, takes the wave of nationalism to help with strength, and the cannons. Yeah, I think, like I said, since Vampire D hasn't set themselves up for Bach or Shakespeare, Gaudi, I think, is a sensible leader, even though he is, I think, rather significantly worse than both of them, especially in a two-player game at least. They do play a conquistadors tactic, even though they don't have the military for it. Maybe they could have put this into knights, but I guess that's another reason to figure, since Vampire D could have built this knight but chose not to, that means they probably have bonus card that they can use to defend with the Himeji Castle. Now the age does end, but I, you know, wasn't willing to take a different leader because I figured even letting the age end and losing Barbarossa to it was better than not having Bach Shakespeare. And I do have my pick, and I do pick Bach. I also lost the printing press at the end of the age. There is the journalism here, but Vampire D, especially with Gaudi, might take the journalism. And also just in general, Bach is easier for me. I don't have that much free population, so it would be a little hard to get a strong Shakespeare going. Bach is more straightforward in that regard. So I do like Bach, and I do want to get those operas going. And I'm still in Rebellion, but yeah, I want to get that culture production going. I went to the end of Vampire D's turn before covering the state of the game. I'm also able to indeed get 2 operas by upgrading. So by upgrading my alchemy to opera, I'm able to get out of Rebellion much easier. I also get even more culture production. Now this will leave me, unfortunately, on just 2 science production. That's a weakness of this play, but if I didn't do it, the only way I could get out of Rebellion would be by destroying something. So that it was better to do this turn, and then maybe next turn I might be able to find a way to rebuild that alchemy or something along those lines. For my final sub action, I take the strategy. I think you need a very good reason not to take the squad with level 1. Now, I do have the Warfare, so I probably won't be playing it, but I do deny it to Vampire D, which I thought was pretty important. Vampire D, after they finish the Harvard College, will probably have enough science to afford the strategy, so denying it to them made sense to me. I didn't really want any of these other cards. Regardless, efficient upgrade. I mean, I could use the efficient upgrade to, like, upgrade this theology to opera, maybe, although losing a happy face would be difficult for me in this situation. I might not want to upgrade this alchemy to opera anyway, and I have a fair amount of rocks, especially if I play the architecture, that I think the efficient upgrade isn't that great for me, and it was more important to deny Vampire D the strategy. I do play the mobile artillery to put even more pressure on Vampire D. I draw an aggression and impact of agriculture. Vampire D plays the reserves for food so they can increase the population. There's like a copy of Knights to compete better with me in strength. That still gives them enough resources to finish the Harvard College. And they take the Conmon with their final civil action. They're able to play it next turn to fix their civil and military action. Especially the military action situation. So this didn't make sense to me. So let's take a quick look at the situation of the game. We're turning into turn 3. I think it's better to do it this turn than last turn because I'm getting my H2 leader. So we can see that Vampire D has definitely caught up to me and even exceeded me in economy, especially after I changed my alchemy into an opera. I have more civil and military actions, but that'll change next turn when Vampire D plays Conmon. But definitely the major advantage I have over Vampire D at this point is culture production. I have +6 culture production over them at this point, and that'll soon be even more after I get my 3rd opera. So I think that I'm going to be pretty quickly running away with culture, and if Vampire D wants to compete with me, probably can't do it peacefully even with Gaudi. Gaudi is only giving Vampire D 3 science. So Bach is giving me currently +4, soon to be +5 science, and he also let me spam these operas, whereas Vampire D, their only other source of culture are 3 from these wonders and 1 from their religion. So definitely not going to be as good as the 9 culture per turn I'll be getting from my operas, even discounting Bach. So Vampire D, I think, isn't really going to be able to compete with me peacefully. So if Vampire D wants to win, they're going to have to find a way to get a big war against me, I think. I do seed, I'm strongest, and I have 1 more farm than Vampire D does, so the impact of agriculture should be good for me. I reveal uncertain borders, which is also good for me, obviously. Maybe not immediately this turn, but it will be. It actually is still good for me. Well, probably not, because I'll probably be putting into opera, but it's at least pretty bad for Vampire D. So I do build a 3rd opera. I don't build it with architecture, unfortunately, but I was starting to feel the science crunch a little bit. I also figured that the architecture was a little bit of a greedy card to play. It would have saved me the 2 resources, but at this, it would have only probably saved me those 2. At this point, it was looking maybe unlikely I would build that many more urban buildings. I mean, maybe a second alchemy, but it would still only save me 4. And I thought that the science was probably more valuable being saved for some military technologies that I wanted to do. Like I said, at this point, I mean, we can see I have plus 10 culture production over Vampire D with probably 4 or 5 more turns to go in the game. So I figured that I had a strong enough advantage over Vampire D at this point that I could afford to play it safe and save my science for, like, the Air Forces, for example, to ensure that Vampire D can't get a big war against me. I did take to the democracy, though. This is, I think, more of a way to ensure that Vampire D can't win against me peacefully. Vampire D does have 5 science production. I mean, they might want to play the Kunmon, but next turn they'll have 17. So one possibility for Vampire D could have been to take the democracy and play it next turn. The 3 culture production that would have given them might have been enough to let them compete with me peacefully if they can get also maybe this multimedia if I don't take it, or another multimedia, or movies. So even though it's looking unlikely I'll play this democracy, at least not soon, I wanted to deny it to Vampire D to make it even less likely that they could overtake me peacefully. And I do take the multimedia as another way to ensure Vampire D can't beat me peacefully. I do pass up the Air Forces, but first of all, it's only the first copy. There's a second copy in 2-player games. Maybe it'll come out at the end of the age, but Vampire D is also not really in a position to war anytime soon. They'll need a lot. They'll need, I mean, maybe this fundamentalism they could take, but they would need, you know, to build many more units and military actions and get a tactic. So I wasn't really worried that Vampire D would war me like in the next 2 turns or so. So I figured chances were very high that the second copy of Air Forces would come out by the time Vampire D is prepared to get a big war against me, regardless. And I also take reserves. Age 2 reserves, not super exciting in Age 3, but with the multimedia, I didn't want the journalism. The journalism would have been pointless for me, so there was nothing else but I could have done with the civil action. I could have considered civil service. I don't think I'll have the science for. Fundamentalism I could have considered as a denial, but there's also a military theory and communism in the deck, so there's other ways Vampire D could get military actions. They also other than the fundamentalism. So I figured that these peaceful denials were more important. By taking this democracy and this multimedia, I'm forcing Vampire D to beat me militarily, which I think is pretty unlikely for them to do, especially if I'm going to run away with the culture lead. So that's why I valued these over that, and since I only have 1 civil action left, there's nothing better to do with it. I draw an Impact of Strength, another bonus card, and a tactic that I probably won't use. Vampire D builds a second arena to fix the rebellion. Takes Admire, notably, even though they're currently on philosophies, it looks like they're aiming to get some computers going. I mean, Sid Meier is maybe... The Age 3 leaders in this game are definitely not super exciting. Some of them can be good. I mean, that's one reason why I really wanted to prepare for Bach Shakespeare, too. Chaplin, if they can get movies going. Churchill could be good for a huge military push. So, Sid Meier, not super exciting, but there is also an internet that's already on the road that they might be aiming for. And so, if they can get Sid Meier plus 3 or 4 computers, there's 2 copies of computers in the deck, they might be able to compete with me, though, again, with me having such a big cultural lead already, the chances of Vampire D winning peacefully look slim. So I think maybe if I were Vampire D, I would have hoped for Churchill instead to help with a military push, because that seems to be the only way they can win at this point. They also take 2 copies of reserves, develop the Constitution, the Kanmon, any Diamond of the Arts, and the Harvard College list them. Played immediately. They do take this copy of Air Forces, though, which, again, if they're, you know, but they won't have the science for it anytime soon anyway, since they're playing the government form instead, so waiting for the second copy also makes sense for them. But again, that makes the chances of them getting a big war against me even slimmer. I do see the Impact of Strength. I figured that, again, since I'm strongest, I wanted to seed. I thought there was a pretty good chance I could win the Impact of Strength. I mean, I have a better tactic than Vampire D does. I have cannons, and Vampire D has the technology but hasn't built them yet, so. Anyway, I do reveal raiders that I'm able to win. I increased my population, so... this is kind of a situation where, again, I feel like I'm winning by a lot, so there's a question of, like, how to guarantee the win. And another reason why I wasn't too worried about Vampire D really punishing me militarily is because there's a Gandhi in this game, and well, since Vampire D is against Admire, I don't even have to take Gandhi this turn. And so, for that reason, that was another reason why I wanted to focus on denying Vampire D a peaceful way of coming back. So with that in mind, I figured that saving my science for military techs probably wasn't needed. And instead, I mean, the multimedia will give me some science back. You know, I'm on TNX, I destroyed my alchemy. But also just in general, again, with Gandhi and with Vampire D, not really. I mean, Vampire D doesn't think the fundamentalism, for example. It looks like Vampire D isn't really planning on trying to get a big war against me regardless. So I thought that getting some multimedias going with the reserves will help me guarantee me even more that Vampire D can't possibly come back from me in a peaceful victory. And also the extra cultural buffer will help in case Vampire D does end up going for a war. I also take the internet, so this internet felt like one way Vampire D could potentially come back. It is, I think, probably, I mean, fast food chains is fine too, but I thought that since I already have these urban buildings going, especially the multimedia, the internet should give me a fair amount of culture by completing it, and will help lock down the game. I do want to take the air forces though. There are 2 copies of Revolutionary Idea. Hopefully I'll get at least one of them, and so I'll be able to play the air forces in 2 turns. I draw an aggression, a war, and another bonus card. Vampire D takes the purse boards for 3 civil actions, interestingly. Plays 2 reserves for food, also takes the computers and the urban growth and the engineering genius. They have just one science. They are missing just 1 science to play the computers this turn, unfortunately. I think at this point it kind of almost doesn't matter. So this turn, let's see. Why did I build the lab? I think I was plotting out maybe my resources for the internet, because at this point it's looking like after this I'll have 2 more turns. So well, let's see what I do with with the remaining of my actions. I do take Gandhi, and I think I play him. Yeah, again, just to lock down the game, make sure Vampire D can't hope to get a war against me. I have enough cultural production that I was comfortable giving some up so that I could get Gandhi this turn. I also take the Revolutionary Idea. I'm running a bit low on science, not much else to do, perhaps. And I build... yeah. Now I see. Yeah, this turn was difficult because I was having hand size issues, right? Because I took so many technologies, mostly I take these technologies, a lot of them as denials, right? But one weakness you have when denying so much is that your hand gets clogged by cards you can't play. And so this turn, in one sense, like I said, because I'm winning by so much, it's a little easier or maybe less nerve-wracking. But it was also a little difficult because there was only so much I can do, as I didn't have enough food to increase my population, and I didn't have the hand space to take very many cards. Definitely wanted the Revolutionary Idea to help me maybe play some of these cards. But in the philosophy, what that does... This is that too. I think it might have an effect on... It might be because of one of these events that I seeded. Well, this event, this H2 event. No, that's the international negotiations. Oh, it was because... No, I had enough resources to build the alchemy, but I think I was afraid maybe that... So, if we think about it, at this point, so I'll probably have 2 turns left in the game, which means I'll get... after this, so after this plus 6 resources, I will have another copy. So for the rest of the game, I'll have 13 resources to work with, right? Barring yellow cards. And so in order to guarantee I can finish the internet, I built 1 stage already, which means that I'll need to spend 12 more resources. So basically, discounting yellow cards, which, you know, Vampire D might take them, so I didn't want to rely on yellow cards. If I had built the alchemy instead of the philosophy, then I would not have had enough resources to finish the internet. And so, building the alchemy this turn is a way for me to get out of corruption, and it at least gives me, well, a little bit of science income, plus 1 more culture from the internet, and like I said, because it costs 3 less, it'll leave me with just enough resources to finish the internet in 2 turns. So that's the reason why I built the philosophy, I'm pretty sure. I continue not to draw impacts. Then Verity takes the Red Cross, develops computers, finally, and is able to get 1 computer with Sid Meier, takes an efficient upgrade with Harvard College lets them get a 2nd computer, so at least they're getting some cultural production going, although still a lot less than me. It's my turn. I can get out of corruption by increasing my population. So at this point, I kind of didn't have much to do. We can see that at least I'll be able to get this copy of reserves to help with the internet. But I didn't have that much to do. I did decide to play the architecture at least. I guess that's another reason about the philosophy, because the architecture will then let me upgrade to alchemy cheaper if I decide to do it. I do take the reserves, easy yellow card to play, and it'll give me resources to do a little bit more before the internet. And I play the revolutionary idea and also take the urban growth, which again, so with these I will have a little bit more resources to do stuff before finishing my internet. I didn't see the need to take any of these other cards. Revolutionary idea, next turn off 17 science, that's enough to play with democracy. I definitely will not need the air forces in this game, so I figured that 17 science was enough. That's another reason why I put the philosophy next turn. I think I actually planned for this as well, with the philosophy about last turn. Next turn would give me just enough science for the democracy, along with the revolutionary idea. I finally draw some impacts. Vampire D Seeds reveals the historic territory. I think I bid a lot for this. I think I didn't bid, I didn't bid as much as I could have, because remember, I had seeded the impact of strength previously. So the historic territory gives 6 culture, but the impact of strength gives 10 culture. So I wanted to be sure that I could win the impact of strength, while also finishing my internet and doing the other stuff I wanted to do. So for that reason, I bid a fair amount, but not as much as I could have, and Vampire D ends up winning the historic territory. They disband their final military unit, take the efficient upgrade, build a lab, upgrade its computers with the efficient upgrade, and build... Oh yeah, I didn't build 1 stage of the Red Cross last turn, because I took the reserves, there was literally no way for Vampire D to have enough food to finish the Red Cross on their turn. I think the historic territory was a card I seeded, probably, actually. So, yeah, I knew that there was no possible way Vampire D could finish Red Cross this turn anyway, so I was able to wait until next turn to build that stage myself. Age 4 begins, last turn of the game. I seed my impact of industry. It's an even impact, but I'll get +3 from seeding. And I think Vampire D, and also reveal the international negotiations, which lets me take enough food from Vampire D that I'm able to complete the International Red Cross while popping Vampire D, yeah, I was a little afraid of seeding Impact of Progress because Vampire D could potentially play the military theory on their turn. Anyway, I do finish the Red Cross, so that, I guess I could have, yeah. I finished the Red Cross before Vampire D can. With the Urban Growth in the reserves, I have enough to build one more multimedia, and upgrade my philosophy to a lab before finishing the internet, which gives me 26 culture. I've seen stronger internets. In one game I played, I actually got, I think, more than 50 culture from an internet. I might show that game to you all later if you're interested. It was a Mercurial Auto game, but 26 is pretty good for an internet. And I disband warriors so that I don't have rebellion. Vampire D Siege reveals that impact of strength, which gives me plus 10 culture. Takes a mech ag, plays that and a purse boards and an oil and a multimedia. Looks like they probably seeded impact of technology and takes some more cards. So before the final impacts, we can see that due to the strong culture protection I had throughout all of Age 3, I am 43 points ahead of Vampire D. There's probably no sort of impacts in the game that could overturn this lead, but we'll see how it goes. First impact is the impact of industry I seeded, which is even for us. Second is the impact of happiness, which gives Vampire D 4 points against me. Next is impact of agriculture that I seeded that gives me plus 2 against Vampire D. And the final one is that impact of technology that I guessed, but that only gives Vampire D plus 8 against me. Not nearly enough to stop me from winning by a fair margin. This game, I think, was mostly a demonstration of how important Bach and Shakespeare are in a two-player game. Even though Vampire D had Gotti, Gotti is just doesn't give you nearly as much culture as Bach and Shakespeare do. So I think that with Vampire D not setting themselves up to get Bach and Shakespeare, I was able to get one of them and just kind of ran away with the game after that. Especially, you know, Vampire D maybe could have tried to get a big war going, but with Gandhi in the game too, I think a big war would have been very unlikely. So in a two-player game like this, especially with this Gandhi and strong in Bach and or Shakespeare, you really need to aim for a Bach and or Shakespeare, or else it'll be very hard to win. Anyway, though, like I said, that was the final game I played in this round, and due to winning it, I end the round with 33 points, which is definitely, I think, a result to be quite satisfied with. When you in the World Championships, finishing with over 30 is pretty hard, so I was happy to see that. That being said, I think this result is maybe makes the group look less close than it really was. Definitely through most of this round, I was pretty nervous that I might not end up finishing first, and in particular, Bull 3, who did end up finishing second. I think 15 points is certainly not a reflection of how well they actually played because of that timeout they had in one of the 4-player games in particular. And I do think that Bull 3 overall played a very strong game and played well enough to potentially beat me if things had gone a little bit differently and if they hadn't timed out. That being said, if I had to make a general criticism of Bull 3's game, I think Bull 3 forced the culture strategy too much, especially in the 3- and 4-player games. The culture strategy we saw in the 4-player game and one of the 3-player games, Bull 3 took Bach, and that can certainly work, that culture strategy, even in 3- and 4-player games, but while in a 2-player game, you generally want to force it, in a 3- and 4-player game, I think forcing it is usually incorrect, and I think Bull 3 had a tendency to force it. And even that 2-player game we played, Bull 3 played that journalism at the end of Age 2 instead of putting those resources into a military, which ended up, and, you know, Bull 3 did some economic stuff instead of military, which ended up making it so that they couldn't get a huge war against me in the end. So I think maybe Bull 3 was a little too focused on that culture strategy and not flexible enough in their game plan. So I think that's probably the number one reason why Bull 3 ended up with this result, but I do think that overall they played a strong game. Obviously, they won 2 of their 3-player games, and if they hadn't timed out in this 4-player game, I think they would have had a higher score than this. So, Bull 3 definitely played well overall, and I'm looking forward to seeing how they do in the future, especially for their, I'm pretty sure this is their first tournament since they didn't have a Glico rating when it began. Vampire D, I think, also played well. I think, in a sense, Vampire D had the opposite problem of Bull 3, where Bull 3 kind of force the culture strategy too much. Vampire D, I think in most, if not all of our games, had a good economy. I guess most. The 2-player game was kind of a struggle. But in the other games, they had a good economy going into H3. And I think what they sometimes struggled with was figuring out how best to transform that economy into culture. And Through the Ages, that can be one of the most difficult things to do, mainly because there are so many ways to do it. And it can be hard to figure out sometimes what's the best way, because sometimes you do it with wars, sometimes you do it with wonders, sometimes you do it with urban buildings, sometimes you do it with impacts, and it really depends on the specifics of that game, you know, which military cards you draw, what cards you get from the card row, what your opponents are doing. It's so context dependent that you can't really it's hard to give general tips on how to transform economy into culture. So I think it mostly just comes with practice. This was also Vampire D's first tournament, I'm pretty sure, because they didn't have a Glico rating when this group started. So I think Vampire D showed a good understanding of the basics of the game, especially with how to get that economic engine going. And I think with additional practice and playing and figuring out, like I said, ways to transform that economy into culture in H3, they can become a much better player. And I'm also looking forward to seeing what Vampire D does in this tournament and hopefully in others. Aaron Weber, unfortunately, despite being the seeded player, so this was the first round they played in the World Championship, and because they finished 4th, they're going to be eliminated. So they're kind of one and done, which is sad. I think of my opponents, Aaron Weber was the most varied, you could say, where I think sometimes Aaron Weber played extremely well. In particular, I'm thinking of the end of our 2-player game, where Aaron Weber got a fork against me, where they forced me into a situation where I could either win the war, but then let Aaron Weber take and complete Hollywood, which they saved up just enough resources to do, or I could take the Hollywood, but then lose the war. I think that was a very clever play that Aaron Weber did that I was impressed by. However, I think Aaron Weber also had the most maybe blatant mistakes out of all my opponents, where I'm thinking especially of the 4-player game that I put on this channel, where I think several times Aaron Weber did questionable plays that were kind of punished almost immediately. So I'm not going to speculate about why that was. I think Aaron Weber showed enough to show why they were a seeded player and that they can play very well, but they just weren't able to bring those skills consistently across all of the games. And I think that's why they ended up finishing 4th. Now, that being said, our 2-player game, remember, was quite close. I only won by 4 culture. And so if that game had gone a little differently, then Aaron Weber would have ended up finishing 3rd and Vampire D would have been eliminated. So Aaron Weber was very close to not getting eliminated, but it still ended up this way, like I said. I hope that Aaron Weber doesn't take this result too much to heart. Like I said, I think they showed enough signs that they're a good player that I think that their play in this round was not a true reflection of their full skills at the game. And so I hope that Aaron Weber does not give up the game and continues to play it, maybe join some other tournaments in preparation for next year's World Championships. Anyway, though, overall, this was a pretty, like I said, I think the results make it look less close than it really was, and I was definitely nervous and stressed through parts of this group, and it's the first World Championships I played in, so I definitely felt the pressure of, this isn't like international or intermezzo where you can bomb a season and it's like you'll still play in the next season. Like if you bomb in the World Championships, you'll have to wait for next year. So I was starting to feel that pressure, but I ended up, kind of taking it home with the 2-player games, which I was happy with. So 33 points, definitely, like I said, results to be satisfied with, and I am also happy to get a few weeks of break before the next round of the World Championship starts. As for these videos, though, I definitely want to keep making them. I am playing in some other tournaments right now that I can make videos of before, the first set of games from the next round of the World Championships is over. I'm playing in Australian Open, the ladders, intermezzos going on right now, so Royal League. So I definitely have material to make more videos while we wait for the next round of the World Championships. So you can definitely look forward to those. I won't promise this to an update schedule, but I'll try to do at least 2 a week, I think. I definitely have fun with these videos, and I hope they're fun for you who's watching them as well. So, as always, please leave me a comment if you have any praise or criticism of either my play or my video making. But Whether or not you comment, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.